European farmers protest against the EU-Mercosur deal that says signing has been postponed until January due to disagreements in Europe. The European-South American deal, planned for more than 25 years, would create the world's largest free trade zone. So why is there division? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Thibault. It's taken 26 years of tough negotiations to get this far, but just days from the finishing line, another hitch. European and South American leaders were due to seal the EU-Mercosur trade deal this weekend. That's now been put off until January due to divisions on the EU side. Creating the world's biggest free trade zone seems to have also given life to arguably one of the longest and most complex international negotiations ever conducted. Not surprising, perhaps, given that 31 countries are involved. Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay and Uruguay are keen to sign, but even after decades of painstaking talks, there's opposition right to the end from some of the EU's 27 states. The EU can ratify the deal without all its members approving, but more work is needed to get it over the line. So why are there still divisions? Is the deal in danger? And if so, what's the outcome likely to be? We'll hear from our guests shortly. First, this report from Alexandra Bias.
The plan was for the European Commission president to be in Brazil on Saturday, signing a trade deal that's been in the works since 1999. But thousands of protesting European farmers and divisions between EU leaders have delayed that until at least January.
The Mercosur deal is really bad for our agriculture because it's going to import stuff that we can produce here with better quality, with less phytopharmaceutical products, products that are forbidden here but are allowed over there.
We are here to defend the future of Italian and European agriculture from the decisions of the European Commission, who want to cut resources destined for agriculture.
The Mercosur deal is aimed at creating the world's largest free trade zone, including 27 EU nations and 4 members of the South American bloc: Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. It will scrap customs duties affecting 720 million consumers across both markets, trade that was worth more than $130 billion last year. The pact would remove more than 90% of tariffs on goods traded between the two blocs. The European Commission says it will save about $5.3 billion in duties. The deal would expand EU exports of vehicles, machinery, and wine, while increasing imports of beef, sugar, rice, and soybeans from Mercosur countries. Germany, Spain, and Nordic countries support the agreement amid growing Chinese competition and recent U.S. tariffs, while France and Italy lead the opposition from 5 member states with strong agricultural lobbies. Critics say it will flood the European market with goods of lesser quality and cut into profits. French and Italian leaders say they need more time to address those concerns.
We believe we're not there yet and that this agreement cannot be signed. It's the same principle. It's about European consistency, and it's about a Europe that protects its agriculture and its producers.
Germany's industrial sector is leading pressure to sign the deal. It's been badly hit by high energy costs since the war in Ukraine began and competition from China. Mercosur's agricultural industry stands to benefit, and the region is also rich in scarce minerals like lithium, copper, and cobalt, which Europe needs.
From Mercosur's side, everything is settled. Mercosur is 100% willing to make the agreement, even though we didn't get everything we wanted. The agreement is more favourable to the European Union than to us.
More talks will continue in Europe, with intense pressure to get the deal over the line. Supporters say Europe must build new partnerships to be resilient, as relationships with the US, China, and Russia have changed. But breaking free will be a delicate choice, between expanding trade with other partners and protecting domestic industries. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guest now. Pieter Cleppe is editor-in-chief at BrusselsReport-dot-eu. He joins us from Brussels. From Roscommon in Ireland, Ciaran Mullooly, member of the European Parliament for the Independent Island Group. And in Sao Paulo, Brazil, Gustavo Ribeiro, founder and editor-in-chief of the Brazilian Report online newspaper. A warm welcome to you all, gentlemen. Thank you for being on Inside Story. Before I get to why you think this EU-Mercosur deal is good or bad, I want to start off with the state of play and where do each of you think this deal stands today after this latest delay. Ciaran, is this a temporary wobble or could this deal still collapse?
Yeah, hi, Folly. I believe, in my opinion, it's indefinitely postponed now. I base that on my discussions with Italian MEPs in our European Parliament plenary sitting in Strasbourg this week. There is considerable uncertainty on the ground still in Italy about this. On one side, there's no doubt there is a strong pro-Mercosur lobby coming from north of the country, in particular the Fiat car industry and its employees, no doubt spurring that on. But it's clear to me as well that Italian MEPs are split alongside ministers in their government. So I feel at the moment it's indefinitely postponed. I believe there's a lot still to play for in the next 3 or 4 weeks early in the new year.
Okay, so you think it's indefinitely postponed. Gustavo Ribeiro, President Lula of Brazil, has hinted that Mercosur may walk away if Europe keeps delaying this. Can this deal still make it, do you think?
Well, I think I agree with Mr. Mullooly. It is as upended as ever because that mid-January timetable that many leaders, both in Mercosur and in the EU, are talking about, it is key because for this deal to move forward, they have to approve it before you have a group of EU lawmakers who want to send the deal to the EU Council of Justice. That could put the deal on ice for an extra 2 years. So here in South America, people are in the mood, or it's now or never. But Lula has since softened his stance, but it's more in the way that if we don't get it over the hump within the next few weeks, we're probably never going to.
All right. Pieter Cleppe in Brussels, an agreement 25 years in the making. Why has this dragged on for so long? And what's changed geopolitically and economically to make Europe suddenly desperate to clinch it? And do you think that they can cross the finish line?
Why did it take so long? Simply because we're talking about a massive trade deal with massive interests. There's great gains for consumers on both sides, for industry on both sides. But to be fair, for certain segments of European industry, notably certain farmers, not all farmers, this means more competition. And farmers have been rightly pointed out that some products would enter the EU that they are not allowed to produce themselves. For example, certain antibiotics that are being used in Latin America cannot be used in Europe, and I think they have a point there. Now the question is then, on balance, what do you decide? According to a German diplomat, it is actually likely that the deal will be approved by European governments in January, because it looks like the Italian government is going along with it, but the European Parliament also still needs to have its say, and it's absolutely not guaranteed that MEPs, that members of European Parliament will go along with this.
Okay, so mixed views there about whether this deal will cross the finish line or not in January. Ciaran, let me come back to you now. Why is this deal unacceptable in your view? What in concrete terms make it bad for Ireland, make it bad for Europe?
Yeah, Folly, I mean, the situation is, my personal opinion is that trade is very important. International trade is very important. I value the trade Ireland enjoys through Europe and indeed around the world, and I look forward to a trade agreement with the Mercosur countries. But the centre stage of our opposition is based on the issue of traceability when it comes to food and the food chain, and particularly the implications for public health. And that's the issue that has brought this to a halt at the moment. We have a situation of two different sets of standards. In Ireland and Europe, we've had a significant clampdown with regard to the use of antibiotics in meat and in feed for animals in the first instance, then going into the food chain. A classic example of this would be the drug Ostrinol, which is banned in Europe since 1981. It's known as a carcinogen, and it is banned. Yet we know, and there is proof, not just from me, not anecdotally, but from the EU Commission itself, from DG Santi carried out its own inquiries. And that drug, Astridol, is one of the drugs still available in Brazil, still being used in Brazil, detected by the Commission inspectors in an audit, and more recently detected by journalists from Ireland who travelled to Brazil. One of our local national newspapers here, a farming publication, came back, spent a number of weeks in Brazil, travelled 3,000 kilometres across the country, and detected widespread use of antibiotics without prescription, without any traceability. And that, I'm afraid, is the centrepiece of the objections of the Irish and many other European states.
Right. But Ciaran, supporters of Mercosur say the products will meet EU standards, that environmental protections were strengthened. Do you not believe them?
Regretfully, no. And I base that opinion on the evidence given to the European Parliament only in the last few months by DG Santi officials. So these are officials of the European Commission whose job it is to look carefully at the meat coming from Brazil and to look for issues. They have detected meat. We've had a recall, Folly, only in the last 3 or 4 weeks. We've had across 8 or 9 different countries, we've had a recall. And people say, is that evidence that there is a system? Unfortunately, it's not, because we've been assured by the Commission and by Brazilian authorities that this illegal use of animal growth promoters would have been detected in Brazil at the abattoir stage. Regrettably, it was detected by the European Commission in Europe. We've got products on the shelves unknown to consumers. They've been eating this meat. And of course, as you well know, the overuse of antibiotics in the food chain has serious implications for public health. The overuse of antibiotics will lead, as we know from the scientists, will lead to significant issues with regard to the immunity of the public going forward. And that's the crucial issue here.
Okay, we hear your objections. Now, Gustavo, you support this deal strongly. Why is it a good deal for Mercosur, and why should Europe sign it?
Oh, I think we talk a lot about trade, and trade is certainly the headline of this deal, but it's not only about trade. I think there are several geopolitical implications with this deal. We have an European Union that is losing influence on the global stage and is kind of squeezed between two superpowers. China, which the EU specifically flags as a systemic rival, and the US, which is increasingly behaving like one. So I think this deal would, for Europe, increase its influence, its geopolitical influence on the global stage. And for
so, Gustavo, is your support for the deal driven by geopolitics rather than economic gain?
Both. I think it is. This deal will bring certainly a lot of gains for Brazil. According to Allianz Trade, they did a report end 2023. Brazil would be, from all Mercosur countries, the country with the most to gain, about $4.2 billion in extra exports to the EU. But I think also when we're talking about geopolitics and Mercosur, Mercosur is a very fragile alliance. It is an alliance of countries that are extremely different, which have different political interests, strategies on the global stage. We have seen, for instance, Argentina and Uruguay threatening to implode this alliance because they want to seek their own trade deals. Now we have, for instance, Paraguay and Argentina cozying up to Donald Trump. We have Bolivia and Uruguay cozying up with China, and Brazil trying to hold everyone together. And I think this deal would be a sort of centripetal force. Like, okay, we share a common goal, and this makes it worth for us to stand together. So from that, and also from the economic side. Now, it is important to say that even in Brazil, this deal is not in unanimity, because I think we see the mirrored image here. In Europe, the agricultural lobby is the one trying to block the deal. In Brazil, industrial lobbies are very skeptical of the deal because of competition issues. They think that they will lose a lot of their market to European competitors.
All right, Pieter, let me bring you into the conversation. For viewers, in practical economic terms, who gains the most from this deal? And what do you say to those in Europe who say that the European Union is rushing into this deal because it feels vulnerable globally?
Well, first of all, you cannot say they're rushing. It's been 25, 26 years now. Now, who is gaining most is very simple. Trade benefits both parties. As has been discussed, I think the major sticking points, at least on the European side, are the justified concerns about antibiotics, and I think you can try to solve that by a lot more stringent checks. So I think European politicians need to do the job here. They need to close a grand deal with farmers, saying, look, we're going to have a lot more checks, and this may actually slow down certain agricultural trade, but at least it's going to be more safe, number one. And number two, they need to tell the farming community, look, we know that you've been over-regulated. We know that we are now exposing you to more competition, which is good for European consumers, but which is basically more challenging for you. But in return, we will scrap a number of European regulations that have been halting the farming community for a long time. And then I think specifically about the excessive nitrogen regulations that are being imposed on the farming sector in the Benelux. But yeah, there's a lot more than that. So I think
so how much of this divide within
people that they will find it in their interest.
Pieter, how much of this divide within the EU reflect deeper disagreements about the future of trade policy?
Well, of course, many people are basically against free trade. They only look at the interests of the producer, whereas in orthodox economics, you have to look, if you want to know if something is good, you have to look at the interest of the consumer, because everyone is a consumer. Obviously, that does not mean that you should, endanger the public. Public health is always sort of paramount. That's sort of a bar that you cannot go under. But sometimes public health concerns are being used as a fig leaf for protectionism.
All right. Ciaran, how does Ireland's position fit within broader EU divisions? Is it aligned with France and parts of Italy, or is its opposition different in character?
Well, very good question, Folly, because the Irish government at the moment is very much sitting on its hands with regard to its position on this. There would have been an Irish government formed here in the last 12 months. As part of that programme for government, the Irish present coalition government was due to work with like-minded countries in Europe to oppose Mercosur. But in the last couple of months, there have been another couple of developments here. Nitrogen was mentioned a few moments ago. Ireland had a specific issue with regard to a derogation on some of those rules. They got a result on that in Brussels in the last couple of weeks, and that has now been pointed to as one of the factors why the Irish government is sitting on its hands and not engaging in opposition to the move. Now, that for me is a disaster from an Irish perspective. They're two separate issues. But I would expect the Irish government to align with France, with Italy, with Poland, with Austria, and Folly, even with Orbán's Hungary, who came out yesterday and said they would vote no. Another element to the deal. So I would expect at the end of the considerable pressure now on the Irish government. We have a major national protest coming up on the 10th of January here in Ireland. I expect 10,000 farmers and their tractors to be on the street. And eventually I expect the Irish government to vote no with those partners.
But Ciaran, what do you say to someone like Gustavo, who says that this is also a chance for Europe to have more geopolitical influence and to be more present in the region that's not fully dominated by China as parts of Africa or Asia are right now? What do you say to that?
I listen to this debate all the time, Folly, and particularly in recent weeks, I've heard this saying that, if we miss this opportunity, China will step in. I can tell you, in light of the serious health concerns raised about Brazilian beef, China will not be rushing to purchase. They've had their own issues with food quality, particularly in baby milk, etc., over the last number of years. They've tightened up on that area. And in the evidence which is presented by the European Commission itself, China will not be rushing in to do a deal until matters have improved. I wish to see an improvement in governance. We need to see European Union Commission officials on the ground in Buenos Aires and elsewhere carrying out their own inspections at the factory door and at farm level. If this can be done, and I believe it can be done over a period of time, then I believe there is a way forward in terms of these negotiations. One other factor I want to raise as well, and some people forget this issue, remember there's still serious concerns about the issue of deforestation in the Amazon region of Brazil going on. Despite assurances in recent times, there are a lot of people on the green categories in Brussels and elsewhere who are still not convinced that this deal can go ahead without a significant effect on the environment.
All right, Gustavo, your response. What improvements can there be? And if South American producers break environmental or safety commitments, what real enforcement tools exist?
Well, I think the environmental arguments against this deal are valid. They do not come from thin air. And I think that much of it is the fault of the former government of Jair Bolsonaro, who ruled Brazil between 2019 and 2022. And I think it's not a coincidence that the deal was first agreed upon in 2019, and then we saw the dismantlement of Brazil's environmental guardrails. Jair Bolsonaro was very open about the way he believes that the Amazon should be used for economic interests. Now, since 2023, we had a change in government. We have seen consistent drops in deforestation rates, especially in the Amazon. This has been a banner on which the Brazilian government has taken a lot of pride in. We have seen a big drop in carbon emissions as well. Now, the perception in South America is that Europe has used selective environmentalism. That is more a way of protectionism, because Europe itself has moved to consider natural gas a green source of energy, although it is a fossil fuel, and it has pushed the EUDR regulations multiple times. It has pushed very recently its plan to electrify its vehicles. So when talking to a Brazilian negotiator for the deal, he said that, well, if you're flexible with principles, they're not principles, they're interests.
All right. Pieter, farmers in Europe feel that they're being sacrificed, whether their work is sacrificed so Europe can sell more machinery, more cars and services to South America. Is that fair criticism, or is Europe today, you think, capable of balancing both industry and agriculture? Because some countries, like Germany, of course, are very much in favor of this deal.
No, I think it's absolutely possible. And, as a politician, you can never win from the farmers. That's an iron law of politics. So you need to bring the farmer communities on board. You need to explain to them that this is also in their interest. They will be able to export more to Mercosur economies. And actually, to go on the topic that the colleagues were discussing, it's been a problem that the European Union is trying to impose its standards on the rest of the world, specifically with deforestation regulations. Countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, they made progress in deforestation. They have their own standards. The EU refuses to recognize these standards. The United States, Trump is lobbying the EU. They get an exemption. Then other countries still have to comply. So the EU has not been making friends with sort of activist trade policies, whereby trade negotiations were abused to try to impose policy choices on the rest of the world. And this is also one reason why it has taken so long to get to this point, for the Mercosur deal. Now, what really needs to happen now, I think the job is to be done in Europe, is to bring the farming communities on board with this and to give them some concessions.
All right. So, Ciaran, what needs to happen now? You've told us about this National Day of Protest in Ireland for farmers to demonstrate against Mercosur. How are you rallying other farmers across Europe? And if not this deal, then what? What's your realistic alternative for Europe's trade strategy, particularly for a country like Ireland, for a small economy like Ireland?
Yeah, so in the first instance, as I say, I've set out our clear objective to try and ensure the proper safeguards are introduced. We had a measure this week approved by the Parliament, which regrettably at trialogue stage fell apart because the parties are not prepared to include one word in that safeguard. That's reciprocity. Reciprocity is all about ensuring that the standards which apply in Europe will apply in Brazil, yet the Commission was unable to get that word included in the trade deal. And that's the reason why we have found lots of support. I've been walking around the corridors in Strasbourg all week, speaking to Italian MEPs. They share our concerns. They are telling Mullooly in no uncertain terms that the Italian beef farmers will not put up with this either. And she has major issues there. While on one hand, she's in favour of Mercosur, she said this in her past, her own deputies have been campaigning and speaking publicly in recent days about their opposition. So I believe over the 2 week to 3 week period we're going to have now, before there will be a meeting of the Parliament or indeed the Council of State, there will be further opportunity for farmers and for people like me to make the case very, very clearly that we need a proper regime of inspection on the ground in Brazil and on the ground in the Mercosur countries. I am pro-trade. I want to see a trade deal going ahead, but I do not want to see an unequal balance, a balanced situation whereby the Brazilians can produce food at half the price we can because they're cheating effectively through the use of illegal growth promoters, which are not good for anybody's health.
All right. Gustavo, your response. What happens if this Mercosur deal fails? And could Mercosur realistically pivot towards China if the deal collapses?
Well, if I may, I think that, and this I'm quoting a Brazilian negotiator with whom I talked this week, and he said that if Europe is serious about making Brazil abide by its own standards, it should sign this deal, because that's how, by augmenting the influence that Europe has on Brazil's trade portfolio, that it will be able to bind Brazil to their own rules. So by not signing this deal, we are pushing Brazil further towards Beijing, which has more of has laxer deforestation standards. Now, yes, China is already Brazil's #1 trading partner by far. And when we talk about other types of investment, and not only agricultural exports, China has become more and more important for Brazil. For instance, the Brazilian government has launched this integration infrastructure plan for South America. Chinese groups were the only ones interested in pitching in to invest. European groups have been absent. So I think this deal also should increase ties between the two sides of the Atlantic.
Okay, Pieter, France is under massive political pressure. Italy is split between industry and farmers, and elections are always around the corner. What happens if this deal fails?
Well, life goes on, but I think it will be a major setback for European trade policy. In the grand scheme of things, we see moves not to decouple from China, but to de-risk from China. We have a more protectionist America. If Europe, fails to close this deal, then it's a great missed opportunity, I think, to then have more intense trade with other major economic powerhouses.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for a great discussion. It'll be very interesting to see what happens over the next few weeks. Ciaran Mullooly, Gustavo Ribeiro, Pieter Cleppe, thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. And thank you, too, for watching. You can always watch this program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And, of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly, Thibault, and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye for now.